we'll get started. So continuing First Peter, we kind of finished talking about these household codes, words to slaves, to wives, to husbands. So starting another big section, I'll read all of it here, and then we'll dig deeper into it the next few weeks. So this is 1 Peter 3:13 to 4:2. It says, "Now who will harm you if you are eager to do what is good? But even if you do suffer for doing what is right, you are blessed. Do not fear what they fear, and do not be intimidated, but in your hearts sanctify Christ as Lord. Always be ready to make your defense to anyone who demands from you an accounting for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and reverence. Keep your conscience clear so that when you are maligned, those who abuse you for your good conduct in Christ may be put to shame. For it is better to suffer for doing good, if suffering should be God's will, than to suffer for doing evil. For Christ also suffered for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, in order to bring you to God. He was put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which also he went and made a proclamation to the spirits in prison, who in former times did not obey when God waited patiently in the days of Noah during the building of the ark, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were saved through water. And baptism, which this prefigured, now saves you, not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience, through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God, with angels, authorities, and powers made subject to him." All right, that's a lot. We'll kind of cover bits of it now. So in this larger unit, the writer of 1 Peter has already kind of said in these last few weeks to slaves, to wives, talk to them about those who suffer abuse because of their stations in the household and society. The general idea is that if you are truly doing right, no harm should come to you. But even 1 Peter acknowledges that sometimes we might suffer precisely because we are doing right. It brings to mind the Beatitudes when Jesus says, "Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people cast insults at you and all kinds of evil against you falsely on account of me." So the author is speaking to the same issue of Christians being treated badly on account of Christ and accused of wrongdoing when they've done nothing wrong. 1 Peter encourages the Christians to remain strong and claim the blessing Christ himself gives for those who suffer for righteousness. So kind of drawing on Isaiah chapter 8, the writer says not to quake before secular power, nor be intimidated by those who claim to hold your life in their hands. Only the Lord is to be feared, only the Lord is to be hallowed. The writer goes on to say that someone may interrogate you about the hope within you. Now, hope is not just hope of an afterlife, but the entirety of faith. And you should be able to make an offer of defense of the gospel you have embraced. And that's important. I talked to our confirmation kids at our last meeting and told them to ask their parents why they want them to go through confirmation. Why is it important? What reason should I have faith? How has faith been important in your life? How has it made a difference? Tell me about the importance of faith. Because I told the parents, if you can't articulate why this is important, why it's meaningful to you, why should the youth go through it? It's the same thing for anyone in this church, elders, deacons, whoever. If someone's like, why should I believe? How has this made a difference in your life? Why is this important to you? And they're like, well, I just kind of always went since I was a kid. That's not much of an elevator speech. That's not going to entice anybody. And it's one reason why in all these small groups we have, we're trying to kind of talk more about the questions that are after the sermon, the bullets, and to get people more used to sharing about their faith, talking about it. Often we want to make it so private, we're nervous about it, but it shouldn't be a private thing. It's actually commanded, be ready to give a defense, to be ready to share the hope you have. Sometimes, and 1 Peter's talked about this earlier, it's kind of been the focus on your lifestyle is going to proclaim the gospel. How you live, how you treat others. That's really important. I love that St. Francis quote, proclaim the gospel always, use words when necessary. How you live can be a testimony. This guy named D.L. Moody had said, of 100 people, 1 will read the Bible, 99 will read the Christian. How you live makes a difference. I think actually next week I'm talking about, or it might be next year. I get my sermons confused. But there was a study several years ago about how millennials view the church. And overwhelmingly, they said, Christians talk about this new life in Christ. We just haven't seen any evidence of it. We haven't seen transformation. So it's important that we do live a certain lifestyle. But also sometimes then you do have to be able to use words and share as well. They're two sides of the same coin. So you do need to be able to speak. But I really like what the author says here. It says, you should do so with gentleness and respect. Nothing is as alienating and obnoxious as Christians witnessing with arrogance, condescension, with rudeness, and intrusion. We've all kind of had those people who just kind of get in your face and be like, are you saved? When were you saved? You're going to go to hell if you don't do this. Or just really kind of get up in your business. That doesn't make anybody want to have a deep, honest conversation. You don't want to be these overpowering street preachers just kind of scaring people into things. It's gentleness and respect. So I am doing a sermon next February on the fruits of the Spirit. And we're doing gentleness. Gentleness is strength under control. So Jesus on the cross, all the power in the world, he's still able to forgive. He could have called lightning and 10,000 angels down. Strength under control. Some of the strongest things you'll ever see are subdued, under control. Sometimes not saying what you want to say is strength and gentleness. So you want to give the hope of the gospel, but respecting others and doing so with love and with gentleness. There's no, so have courage, yes, but do not hinder the gospel progress with your attitude. Do not irritate listeners as if you want them to get mad at you. There's no need to make your own cross. If suffering is to come your way, it'll come. There's no need to actively seek it. Some people go out and try to show Jesus everywhere so people will get mad at them and be like, I'm persecuted for Jesus' sake. No, you're being persecuted because you're a jerk. There's a difference. But they wear it as a badge of honor, like, oh, I'm just, people throw it in people's face so they can be told you can't do this. Then they can pretend to be a martyr. That is not what Peter is talking about. So early Christians sometimes did actually seek suffering because of these verses. They're like, I want to have the sufferings of Jesus. People would go out of their way to try to be beaten, to be subjected to different things because they thought that was the holy thing to do. People still do that to a degree. And that's not what the author's saying. It's more that naturally following the way of Jesus is going to lead to suffering. You don't need to go out and seek it. You don't need to try to live in such a way that suffering just finds you constantly, that you can then say, like, well, I'm suffering for Jesus, I'm super holy. No, it should be more of a natural consequence. Think of it this way. If you love anyone or anything, you will suffer. Because sometimes that person may say something or do something that hurts you, and that can hurt deep. Or if you really love someone and you see them suffer, that's going to hurt you. Compassion is literally suffering with. So if a child is sick, a husband, a spouse, a parent is dying, and you're holding their hand and they're suffering and in pain, you will hurt and you will suffer. Because the way of love involves suffering. And the way of God, the way of following Christ, is the way of loving everyone, loving our neighbors. So even seeing what's happening in Gaza right now should break our hearts. And to see those parents whose children, their spouses have been taken hostage and they may never see them again, that should break our hearts. And seeing children who are hungry should break our hearts. And violence on the streets, people feeling that they don't have welcome in this country or in a church or in a city or a school, should break our hearts. Naturally, following the way of Jesus is going to lead to suffering. Because sometimes it means turning the other cheek. Sometimes it means proclaiming the truth when people don't want to hear the truth. Martin Luther King Jr. wasn't looking to suffer, but he knew it was coming. Because he knew, if I continue to preach this message and live this way, trouble's going to find me. But I have to go this way. There's a difference between accepting the suffering that's going to come because you're trying to live the truth and live love and live grace versus poking a bee's nest and being like, oh, I got stung. Look at those horrible bees. There's a difference there. So again, we have to look at the whole scriptural witness about this. When you look at these verses, because some people have said, hey, we should go look for suffering. But the larger biblical witness is God trying to relieve suffering again and again of demon possession, of sickness, releasing from slavery. So speaking the truth is always dangerous, but that's more what it's about. Now in the coming weeks, there's no 11-minute lessons next week because of the annual meeting, but we're going to look at the rest of this passage. And there's this interesting piece about Jesus going and speaking to those in prison, or some translations say going to speak to those in hell who had disobeyed in the time of Noah. So what does that mean? That's where often we get this line in the Apostles' Creed that some churches use and some don't. He descended into hell. That often comes from this verse. That's often an interesting point for people, so we will dig deeper into that next time. Are there questions, comments, or inclusive remarks?
I'm just interested, Stephen, you mentioned about millennials aren't seeing what would it take? What do they see?
Yeah. So that was like 10 years ago, 15 now. So now it's probably more Gen Z. What I think they want to see is so often the loudest churches are sometimes the ones who are excluding people, hating people, or just kind of living for themselves. What I think people want to see is generosity, kindness, love. So there's an example. There's a mega church in Alabama, evangelical church, that you might think on first case, they might be one of those that live the bad way. And they're like excluding people. But what they did is they said, you know what, our goal is to make sure not a single child in our county has to be in foster care. We're going to find homes for every single one of these people. And they did. And people are like, okay, that's a church stepping up, seeing a need, and putting themselves out there because of their faith in Jesus. They're seeing it. I think that's what people want to see. They want to see love. They want to see respect. They want to see inclusive welcome. They don't want to see you doing the same things everyone else does all the time. Now, we're all going to make mistakes, but you shouldn't have a Jesus bumper sticker and constantly have road rage and cut people off and yell at people. It's like, we're going to have moments of that, but if that's your MO and you're advertising being a Christian, those things don't compute. People are like, well, new life, love, and forgiveness, I ain't seeing it. The other side, there are some people who don't want to see it. You have to sometimes look. Because the other side is you don't want the churches to go out bragging to the whole world. This is what we do all the time. You don't want to be like the Pharisees and like, we do a lot of stuff here, but we aren't constantly calling the newspaper and saying, hey, do this story about us because we did this great thing. That's not what you want to do either. So it's kind of like a slow burn sometimes. People do see, though, how you live and how you care for people. One of my favorite stories is when I was in high school and I was like a leader at this camp for the junior highs at our church and everything. After this in the camp, this one kid asked our pastor, like, when did Stephen change? Because he used to be this real, like, cynical, jerk, horrible person. And he's completely different now. Was that after, he started following Jesus? And the pastor would be like, yeah. And we then talk to me about it. And I was able to talk to this person because they saw something changed in my life. I was a person they didn't want to be around to a person they did want to be around. And they wanted to know why. How can I have what he's having? So I think, yeah, they asked him first, the pastor, like, hey, what's going on here? Which is good too. So yeah, you wanna live in a way that people kind of can see that you have a different kind of hope, that you have a different kind of patience. When we do this series next winter on the fruits of the Spirit, that you're living those things: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control, all of that. Yeah.
So, you talk about feeling bad for what happened to this person or that group of people. It's like, how do you at some point say, I'm overloaded?
Yep, there's this whole thing that was happening during COVID of like compassion fatigue, where everyone's wanting you to feel horrible about so many different things. And that's where you have to kind of compartmentalize for yourself too. You can't fix everything. You can't be responsible for everything. Everybody's different. You kind of have to be like, okay, here's an area I want to try to fix. I can't fix it all. Because there's enough problems to go around to keep you busy all the time. There's that fine line of ignoring it and pretending it's not happening, which is a place of privilege, to be able to not care, versus I'm going to let this completely consume me and destroy me and cause other things to go bad. And that line is different for everyone.
And the thing is, you get so many requests for help for St. Jude's.
Oh, yeah.
And that place, like, okay, how many can I do? What
You
I
have
really
to,
would like to do, but I
and
can't.
that's the key where you have to decide who do you love and what do you care about. And you can care about things on different levels, but everybody has their biggest passions. So no, you're not expected to give to every single thing that asks for it. You don't have to ridicule them, but you can say, you know what, I'm going to focus my energies here, here, and here. For an example, when I got to this church with the mission committee, Julie knows this, and when we were supporting like 70 different things, no one in the church, no one in the mission committee could tell you about every single one of them. Because we just heard every request. We didn't want to say no because they were all good. It's like, here's $200, here's $200, because there's tons of good things out there. But we said, okay, what are our mission priorities? We want to not just give money, but be able to actually partner with some of these things. So we're going to have to say no to some to have a bigger and more impactful yes to others. And that's where it comes down to kind of deciding what's important to you, what are your priorities, what are you passionate about, where do you think you can make the most good? And that's one of the difficult things. To say yes to anything means saying no to something else. And those are tough choices to make. Life is hard. All right, thank you all very much.